disco midsection, you're still struggling, aren't you?
Quick dial my mum. She'll be rattling them off.
Of course, they're mainly a covers act, so... What? Yeah, a lot of that. Well, Rivers of Babylon, there's a Jimmy Cliff song, isn't it?
They made it their own, though, Finlay.
They did indeed.
Boney M didn't get on stage till 10 to 9, and that's...
past their bedtime.
That's another bony of contention for concert goers. The promoter says they'll be on stage by 8:15.
Did you say bony of contention?
Yes, he did.
That was
A
good.
pun, thank you. They'll be on stage by 8:15 in future. So you pay $90 a ticket. Fans paid upwards of $90. So you expect a longer show and an earlier show, do you?
Well, yeah, you do, but also Boney M should be playing to their audience, which is possibly older, so that's getting pretty late, isn't it?
Not for me. I can stay up that late.
Was there an opening act?
I don't know.
I think so.
Because there was a hits of the 90s tour last week or last fortnight, with Vanilla Ice and Salt and Pepper and so on. And that sounded like that was actually a great night, of those kinds of nights.
I've got Rasputin on my Spotify.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia's football team's been heavily criticised for not observing a minute's silence in honour of the terror victims in London, some of whom, of course, were Australian. And this was at the start of a World Cup qualifier in Adelaide. So what is your assessment of this? The defence was they don't have it as part of Saudi culture, although, of course, people have been quick to point out instances where Saudi sports people have observed moments of silence in the past, e.g. the Brazilian soccer team Chapecoense killed in that plane crash. What do you think? Were they more worried about how it might play out back home? What do you suspect went on?
I don't know. I doubt it. Without knowing...
Well, I think of all the times I go overseas and you end up into those cultural environments and you've usually got someone whispering in your ear saying, do this or stand here and do that. And you would have thought that they would have paid more heedance to that. Because you imagine if it was the Australian football team doing something that was against a protocol or an asked thing of them playing in Saudi Arabia. They wouldn't be coming out of Saudi Arabia. I can't
I wonder if, though, there was a weird communication breakdown because some of the players apparently did stop and observe the silence, and some didn't.
They seemed to stop and look, some of them, didn't they? And some of them were dying
if they
up their
deliberately flouted a request by their host country, then they're a pack of jerks, right? If, being the operative word.
And there's still talk going on about the Blues' throat-slitting gesture during the haka being insensitive after the London stabbings. I know this is a few days old now. Just before we go, do you have an opinion on that? Do you see it as an innocent kind of, didn't relate the two events together?
Yeah, well, can I just ask a couple of questions that may have been answered? Was that the first time the Blues have done a haka? I'm not aware.
I thought it was.
Yeah. So they were doing it as a special thing for the Lions. So they possibly were nervous or just so ensconced in the rehearsals and getting it right that they didn't really stop to understand what it might have looked like.
Also, is it a throat-slitting gesture? Because that's disputed.
Yeah, it is disputed.
That it's actually about the breath of life.
Yes.
It looks throat-slitty in a way.
But you wouldn't think that in that rehearsal that Clark talks about, if the connection had been made, which, you would think that it probably wasn't made when it was being organised and prepared.
No, it's one of those things you might think afterwards and go, oops.
Daddy Cool, Brown Girl in the Ring, you've deliberately understated the number of hits that Boney M had.
I thought I was at Radio New Zealand, not Classic Hits.
I'll flick you a DVD.
Finlay McDonald on the panel today. Thank you, Finlay.
Thank you.
And Clark Gayford. Thanks, Clark.
Thank you, Jim.
And have a good weekend, everybody. And Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone, coming up tonight, the Oysters are coming out, but how, by whom, and is it too late? Parihaka on a very moving day, Jim Comey on Capitol Hill, and New Zealand through to the Challengers final of the America's Cup, plus, of course, in depth, what is happening in Britain. Quite an extraordinary night if you have been watching through our day. It is a hung parliament. The Tories had an overall majority. They called a snap election, and it is no overstatement to say that they will seriously be regretting that. We go there live. We have analysis on a very big UK day. Thank you for being with us. Checkpoint Friday night. We'll be back after the news at 5.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The government says a United Nations request for more information on New Zealand's involvement in a raid on 2 Afghan villages in 2010 is based on factual inaccuracies. The UN Committee on Torture has requested a further investigation of the raids, which were discussed in the book Hit and Run. Dean Bedford reports.
The committee has asked the government to outline what has been done to investigate all the allegations in the book. But Jerry Brownlee says the raids have already been investigated and disproven, so the questions are based on factual inaccuracies. He says the raids were also investigated by the International Security Assistance Force. Mr Brownlee says the questions being raised by the UN Committee are part of a routine reporting process, with answers not required for 2 years. He says the government will respond to the UN in 2019. This is Dean Bedford.
The BBC is forecasting Britain will have a hung parliament following the snap election. The Conservatives have 307 seats and Labour have 257 seats, with 19 seats left to count. The BBC says the Conservatives are predicted to remain the largest party, but it's already clear they've failed to win the 326 seats needed for a clear majority. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, is yet to speak, but has now left Conservative Party headquarters and arrived at Downing Street, entering through the back door. Mrs May has retained her seat, as has Labour's Jeremy Corbyn. A High Court judge says a Christchurch man who murdered a 15-month-old has shown disregard for the baby boy's family by not fronting up to his actions. Troy Kevin Taylor was found guilty by a jury in March of assaulting and murdering Parihaka Stokes at their home in 2015. The 24-year-old was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. Justice Manda today sentenced Taylor to a minimum of 17 years in prison. He said Taylor had never taken responsibility for Parihaka's death, instead telling police the toddler had fallen in his cot, and then at trial pointing the finger at the boy's mother.
In my view, that demonstrates a certain callousness and a certain disregard for Parihaka's family, and importantly, an inability by you to face up the enormity of your action.
Justice Manda said Taylor had caused a profound amount of grief. A Stewart Island oyster farmer is unhappy about the short notice he's getting to cull his oysters. The Ministry for Primary Industries has confirmed it's ordering a cull of farmed oysters on the island to try to stop the spread of the deadly parasite Bernamia austriae. The infection was discovered a fortnight ago, but farmer Rodney Clark says he was only contacted by government officials today. Mr Clark says the decision to cull all of the area's flat oyster stock could mean the end of his 14-year-old business. The Labour Party will ban farmers from intensifying their operations unless they have resource consent. Labour has launched its new freshwater policy, which it says will improve water quality within 5 years. It says within a generation, even the most grossly polluted rivers and lakes will be cleaned up. Labour's water spokesperson David Parker says the key to getting cleaner water is better rules and better regulation.
It doesn't cost money to clean up rivers. All you need to do is to stop pollution being put in them and they clean up themselves. This idea that we should not have rivers clean enough to swim because it costs too much to make them clean is just a nonsense.
David Parker says Labour will also implement a new national policy statement for freshwater management and take action against controversial farming practices to protect waterways, wetlands and estuaries. A 36-year-old Canadian man has been arrested over the importing of $5 million of methamphetamine found hidden inside a consignment of candles. Customs officers at the International Mail Centre intercepted a package of home accessories sent from Canada on Tuesday. Customs Investigations Manager Bruce Berry says this is another example of good profiling and examination and quick action to catch the individual involved. Descendants of the colonial troops who marched on Parihaka have welcomed the apology made for the atrocities committed in 1881. Warren Siserich's ancestor was a member of the Taranaki Constabulary that took part in the sacking of the settlement, which had become a focus point for non-violent resistance to land confiscation. Mr Siserich says it was important for him to be at Parihaka.
We've understood a lot of the injustices that had occurred but had never been properly addressed, so we were keen to be part of this event today.
Warren Sisorich, the Minister for Treaty of Waitangi Negotiations, Chris Finlayson, today apologised for the sacking of Parihaka and the illegal imprisonment of its men. And for the first time, atrocities committed against Parihaka women have been acknowledged. It's 5:05. The All Black winger Julian Savea will run out for his 100th Super Rugby match for the Hurricanes when they host the Chiefs in Wellington tonight. The 26-year-old made his Hurricanes debut against the Highlanders in 2009. He'll become the 10th player to reach the milestone for the Canes, joining the likes of Tana Umanga, Ma'anonu, Conrad Smith and Corey Jane.
It is quite humbling, and the legends of the Hurricanes and all over the world actually. It's honour and privilege to be part of that, to be part of that club. It's been, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. It's been special, and a lot of those boys, I've played with them, and they've helped me along my journey as well.
Kick-off is at 7:30. The Great Britain helmsman Ben Ainslie believes Team New Zealand has a good chance to win the America's Cup. Ainslie was beaten 5-2 by Team New Zealand in the Challengers semi-final, with the New Zealanders now going on to meet either Sweden or Japan for the right to challenge for the Cup. Ainslie says good old Kiwi ingenuity has got Team New Zealand on top of their game and could upset holders Team USA in the final. Sweden led Japan 4-3 in the other semi-final. The Mainland Tactics have appointed Marianne Delaney-Hoshek as their head coach through to the 2018 National Netball season after former coach Sue Hawkins unexpectedly quit in April. Delaney-Hoshek was the interim coach for the Tactics while management searched for a replacement. The Tactics are last on the premiership table with just one win to their name this season. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights after the news at 7, we'll be talking to the team behind Mend and Make Awesome. Why make do when you can mend and make awesome? Be part of the repair revolution. Being Friday, the Country Life team is back with another program. We'll have another one of those great mixtape programs in the last hour, plus a Sonic Tonic all about the telephone. Remember, your call is important to us, so please hold. Tonight, after the news at 7, Nights, RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waitomo, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taumarunui and Taupo. Cloudy periods developing later, a few showers in the west overnight and morning, then clearing later tomorrow. Taranaki to Kapiti Coast and Taihepe, cloudy periods, a few showers developing overnight, then clearing later tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, mainly fine, cloudy periods and isolated showers spreading north tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, however showers for coastal Marlborough tomorrow morning. Bulla Westland, cloudy periods and isolated showers becoming confined to coastal Bulla tomorrow and clearing elsewhere. Canterbury Central and North Otago, fine, a few cloudy periods tomorrow with isolated morning showers about Otago and coastal Canterbury. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, rain spreading north this evening, possibly thundery in the south, followed by squally showers easing tomorrow, gale westerlies in the south at times, and the Chatham Islands often cloudy with a few showers. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. It's a really busy program tonight. MPI have ordered the Oysters out, of course, in Big Glory Bay, Stewart Islands. But is it too late? Parihaka, what a moving day there. We are there. Jim Comey rattling the cages on Capitol Hill in New Zealand through the Challengers final of the America's Cup. All of that coming up. But of course, we begin tonight in a sleepless Britain, where throughout a long, long night, the Conservatives saw the overall parliamentary majority they had and could have had until 2020 being whittled away. Theresa May called the snap election to consolidate Tory ascendancy. She didn't. Votes are still being counted. The final makeup of Parliament isn't yet known, but the Conservatives can't now regain their overall majority. That requires 326 seats. The Tories had 330 seats. They've lost 12 of them at last count so far, which means 318 is the best they can achieve. Labour has gained somewhere in the region of 30. I haven't looked for a couple of minutes. As we speak, the UK Parliament is hung. We cross now live to our correspondent, Dan Ashby. Dan, what a night, what a morning, what is happening?
time. It was one of those jaw-dropping moments in UK politics. Everybody was expecting the Conservatives to get a landslide majority, to strengthen their hand, and suddenly we're hearing about a hung parliament for the first time. The Labour Party has done fantastically well over the past 6 weeks. They've whittled away the Conservative poll leads. They now look set to gain 30 seats, but as you say, that means we look on course for a hung parliament. Remember, this isn't supposed to happen in the UK. The parliamentary system is set up for a strong government, first past the post, so that there aren't coalitions. But yet again, no party has overall control.
No, of course the Tories had overall control, didn't they? They had 330 seats. So by a very small number of seats in overall majority, May believed that she would increase that majority and really smash Labour for the foreseeable future. It was a calculated gamble and it has misfired badly. Will it cost her her leadership?
Yes, she's looking in a very shaky position at the moment. As you say, it was a gamble. And it was a terrible election campaign as well. Crucially, she didn't turn up for an election debate here in the UK. That appears to have backfired now. She is now in talks with the Conservative Party, but already we're seeing Conservative MPs calling this a dreadful campaign. Different politicians across the spectrum calling for her to go. Of course, the opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, said long ago that she should resign. The former leader of UKIP has done the same, but even her own MPs now are making similar noises. She will be going into those talks, but of course, at best, the Conservative Party will have to try form a coalition with a working majority, or they will have a minority government. That is most likely going to lead to another election. And looking at the performance that she's had over the past 6 weeks, you can't see how the Conservatives will want to back her again in a second election.
No, let's talk about Jeremy Corbyn. Gosh, his own party hated his guts. Well, actually, it was the party that liked him. It was the Labour establishment that really actively disliked him and simply couldn't conceal it. They must be eating humble pie in huge doses today. But what did he do right?
Well, it's an extraordinary story, isn't it? I mean, this is a man who was a backbencher all his life, no ministerial experience, a political unknown. And as you say, look back a year ago and the Labour Party was in civil war. You had mass resignations from the shadow cabinets. You had people calling for votes of no confidence against him. And he just kept on and kept on. And when the Labour Party was in doubt, he went to the public and they voted him back in as leader. Now he's obviously gone into this election and people said he would never convince the British public. He may be able to convince Labour voters, but not the British public. And he seems to have done exactly that. He's increased the Labour amount of seats. Now, having said all that, he, of course, hasn't won the election. Labour isn't the largest party, but even so, he's defied all expectations, considering everybody thought that Labour would be completely demolished.
Striking to see also that in the South, I mean, this is a very strong backlash against a number of things. As you say, May had a very, very poor campaign. There was a sense the Tories were really arrogant going to the country 3 years before they had to, and also this is a backlash against Brexit. So there's a whole lot of subtext here. But the really interesting thing is Labour still only have 258 seats as it stands. The Tories have 307. It's entirely probable, isn't it, that they will still form the next government?
Exactly, yeah, very likely indeed, because when you look at the opposition position to try form a coalition, that doesn't look likely at all. Labour would have to approach the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Nationalists and perhaps others as well to form a coalition. And of course that's unlikely because the Liberal Democrats formed a coalition in 2010, got stung really badly by it, lost a lot of their seats, and they've said all along they're not going back into a coalition. So it very much looks like the Conservatives are still in the driving seat, but that doesn't mean they've got that much stability. They'd have to approach the DUP in Northern Ireland. There's a lot of policy differences there, and they may have to just simply go for a minority government. Of course, what that means is relying on the goodwill or cooperation of other parties who might not agree with them going forward.
Dan Ishby looking in rude good health for a man who's been up all night. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan. What a fascinating night it has been in the UK, as is befitting of a snap election decision that goes so badly awry. Theresa May is now under the kind of internal pressure, perhaps, that Jeremy Corbyn was under, as Dan said, not very long ago at all. This has not gone as she hoped or expected, and the party will be feeling exactly the same way. It was a strange, almost endless night in which no one really seemed entirely sure what was going on.
This election was called. This election was called in order for the Prime Minister to gain a larger majority in order to assert her authority.
It was just after 3 a.m. when Jeremy Corbyn went to address the people of Islington as their re-elected MP. He sounded tired. It has been a brutal, exhausting campaign, following the brutal, exhausting campaigns he fought to win and retain Labour leadership.
And I'm very, very proud of the campaign that my party has run, our manifesto for the many, not the few, and I'm very proud of the results that are coming in all over the country tonight of people voting for hope for the future and turning their backs on austerity. And so, if there is a message from tonight's result is this. The Prime Minister called the election because she wanted a mandate. Well, the mandate she's got is lost Conservative seats, lost votes, lost support and lost confidence. I would have thought that's enough to go, actually, and make way for a government that will be truly representative of all of the people of this country.
Of course, Labour has fewer seats. The Conservatives are out in front. It's just the gap between them has closed in a way that was so unexpected when Theresa May called the snap election in mid-April. And when she arrived at her electorate, Maidenhead, her batteries sounded flat.
Of course, returns are still coming in. We have yet to see the full picture emerging. Votes are still being counted. But at this time, more than anything else, this country needs a period of stability. And if, as the indications have shown, and if this is correct, that the Conservative Party has won the most seats and probably the most votes, then it will be incumbent on us to ensure that we have that period of stability, and that is exactly what we will do.
It was a win without triumph or even the pretence of it. Labour came second again, but their mood was triumphant.
Labour Party, 25,056 votes.
Seat by seat, they declared. This was first past the post, of course, and they confounded consistency and prediction. Swings to the Tories here, swings to Labour there, swings the BBC couldn't even hear.
Thank you. And I'd like to pay my tribute and thanks to the returning officer.
Well, once again, the sound quality is abysmal from these places. It's meant to be in 2017, not 1917.
And as the confusion mounted, the shape of Brexit became less certain than it already is. Remember, exit negotiations start on Monday week. Here's Ken Clark, father of the House, as Parliament's longest-serving MP.
I hope in the new Parliament we'll have some slightly fuller debate about what exactly the position is that the British government, whichever government it is going to adopt.
Negotiations, Andrew Marr suggested they may now not even be able to happen.
These are supposed to start properly in about 10 days' time. What happens if there is no Prime Minister who commands a majority of the House of Commons to have those negotiations with?
Andrew Marr also expressed a thought that would have been inconceivable not very long ago at all, as the internal dissent became so very public and Labour's anti-Corbyn faction almost tore the party apart.
One thing we can say for sure is that Jeremy Corbyn is safe as leader of the Labour Party so long as he wants to be. He's had a great campaign, and when people like Douglas Alexander are giving the benefit of the doubt, he's safe.
On TV, on social media, in halls throughout the UK, the night echoed with Labour insiders who passionately, even angrily, campaigned against Jeremy Corbyn's leadership in both 2015 and 16, conceding that Corbyn's campaign had defied their expectations. And remember, the election was not due until 2020. It was Theresa May herself who went early, in part because Labour were in such disarray, as commentator after commentator pointed out.
Theresa May's roll of the dice looks set to be one of the biggest political mistakes that we have seen for quite some time. We've seen Jeremy
Corbyn arriving at his count in Islington,
smiling like a Cheshire cat. I mean, let's not forget, he was elected by Labour members to the astonishment of the Labour political establishment once. Then the Labour establishment tried to get rid of him. He was re-elected twice, and now he looks to have achieved one of the biggest political upsets in many, many years.
Had he? Has he? The mood of upheaval and uncertainty travelled to Sheffield Hallam, where Nick Clegg, Deputy Prime Minister under David Cameron and former leader of the Liberal Democrats, had lost his seat. He was strikingly matter-of-fact about that.
You live by the sword and you die by the sword.
But on the larger subject of what now lies ahead for the UK, Nick Clegg spoke to the profound divisions that its politicians must now somehow address.
It is a parliament which, in my judgment, will not only face the excruciating task of trying to assemble a sensible government for this country, will not only need to deal with the agonising decisions which we face as a country as we navigate our way towards Brexit, but is a parliament that is presiding over a deeply, deeply divided and polarised nation.
Seldom a truer word said. We will update the latest tally throughout the programme as dawn breaks in the UK. But where would a UK election be without the bookies? Let's go to William Hill now and Joe Crilly. Joe, are you there?
I am indeed, yes.
Nice to talk to you. Have you been up all night?
I have, yeah. I've been hard at work at one of our national broadcasters doing a few bits and pieces as the shock has kind of settled and realism has kicked in and the odds have fluctuated incredibly over the course of the evening.
Where was the money? Where had most of the money gone? Was it on a Tory victory or an overall Tory majority, which are different things, right?
Yes. So, I mean, we've taken a lot of money on Tories to win the most seats, which it looks like they have done
Absolutely.
Now, with just a few seats left to go. But the majority of the money was on a Tory majority. And there'll be a lot of punters with very sore heads this morning. We had one guy who placed £70,000 on at odds of 1 to 7. So he risked £70,000 to win 10 grand on the Tories getting a majority. Didn't quite work out for that guy. However, another chap placed £200,000 on the Tories getting the most seats, which of course they have done. So swings and roundabouts for some of our punters, but yeah, the majority of the money on the overall market was for the Conservatives, and actually the worst backed of perhaps the three realistic options in Labour, no overall majority, and the Conservatives, the least money on those three was for no overall majority. So we're not too upset with the result, certainly.
No, you won't be upset with it. What's changed? Now, look, I'm using you as a political commentator here, Joe, but you've been sitting up all night, you've been watching where the money's coming from, and you will know the people who were most surprised by this. And I suspect they're older betters, right? So is this that people are out of touch with a constituency who are new to voting or who don't express themselves in conventional ways, i.e. young people?
Yeah. So what happened with the Brexit vote was there was a very apathetic youth population who didn't really galvanise themselves to go out and vote in the Brexit referendum. You know what happened there?
We do.
52 to 48% voted to leave the European Union. And I think that was a kick up the backside, actually, for the young, political-minded people of the country. And Jeremy Corbyn has really, he's really tapped into that as an asset in this election, and that is why Labour have done so well. You saw while Theresa May was swerving televised election debates, and while she was not really going on the campaign trail, such did she think that they would win comfortably, the Conservatives. Jeremy Corbyn has been going out on and really appealing to the youth of the population. He was on stage with the Libertines at one point. He's really kind of tapped that resource and made it his own. And the younger voters were really, really behind Corbyn this time around.
Absolutely fascinating election. Just before you go, Joe, Theresa May, is she going to remain, according to the bookmakers, according to you guys, leader of the Tories? And if not, where will the money go, do you think?
Well, actually, we've currently suspended the betting on whether she will remain as leader of the party. As I understand, she is to make a statement later on, probably this morning, as to whether she will continue in her role, primarily as Prime Minister, but also as leader of the party. Should she go, Boris Johnson is the favourite to take over 9-4, with Amber Rudd, who managed to keep her seat by around about 300 votes. So a very tight one there. Amber Rudd is the 5-1 second favourite, so it certainly looks like a two-horse race between those two. And just finally, interestingly enough, the air of uncertainty now that this election result has brought with it, we're now odds on at 8-11 that we have a second general election this year.
Holy moly. Joe Crilly from William Hill. Thanks so much, Joe. We really appreciate you joining us here in New Zealand. As Joe was saying, this is all unfolding. A statement due from Theresa May. We will go back to the UK as and when things of substance arise. The government has ordered the cull of all farmed oysters on Stewart Island in an effort to stop the spread of this deadly parasite. Since the disease was found a fortnight ago, Bluff's oyster industry has been pushing hard for a complete cull in order to save wild oyster stocks out in Foveaux Strait. In a moment, we'll hear from MPI, but first, Big Glory Bay Oyster Farm Manager Craig Farmer told me what the directive will mean for the farms he manages.
That every oyster has to be taken out of Big Glory Bay. There's be meeting on Tuesday, and everyone's notified by Monday to start the ball rolling to remove the oysters.
Every single oyster in Big Glory Bay?
Well, that's what they've said, every single oyster. I don't think they realise how big a job it's going to be, because we have our oysters reseeded with our mussels, and each line has probably got 66,000 oysters per line. I've got 45 lines with that amount of oysters on. The lines are 300 metres long, so it's not just an overnight fix. And I just don't realise how big an operation it's going to be. It's like they haven't told us where to get rid of the mussels, how to get rid of the oysters. It's just not. No one's been down here to even have a look.
Well, wait a sec. So, how many mussel farms? Oyster, and mussel. But how many oyster farms do you manage?
I manage 6. I manage EC, Jeff Walker, Peter Schofield, and Ivan Gordon's.
Okay, and have MPI been to see you in person?
No, they haven't. So I've just heard from the owners that's what has to be done. So but the thing is, MPI haven't been up there to see how big an operation it's going to be. Even stripping them, well, you have the crop fall off into the water to the bottom. So if they're going to do it properly, well, it's just not that easy. They just don't realise. It's just sort of a bit mind-blowing at the moment.
Do you think it can be done?
Oh, but it probably can, but it's going to take months. It's just not just that easy, just to harvest a line. It just to get the crop and to separate the mussels from the oysters is a slow process. It just they don't realise how sort of difficult it's going to be. But if that's what they want, well, so sort of at this moment we're sort of just twiddling our fingers, trying how to do it. So.
And how will you do it? Do you because of course, normally you can remove oysters in a fairly robust fashion as long as the shells don't break, right? You get them to market and like that, that's fine. But in these circumstances, you have to be really gentle because the whole point is to keep the parasite as far from Foveaux Strait as you can. So how the hell do you do that? Do you know?
Oh, no. But that's the thing, they just haven't sort of arrived on the island. There's been no one from MPI on the island since it's happened. They knew from 24th of May it happened. There's been obviously no one from MPI up at the farm. Nothing. You try and ring them and you just get just sort of not answer phones and stuff like that. So it's just sort of a bit annoying, really. So.
And what about your economic exposure across the farms? Have people been told about compensation, financial support, those kinds of things?
Oh, well, I'm not sure. But there's talking about it. Like I've got guys that have got mortgages and stuff like that work for us, and sort of it's it's their livelihood. So you sort of do that. That's going to knock a bit of a sort of financial sort of burden on them a bit. But it just I don't think they've sort of really put much thought into it. So that's my theory. But just going to be a mammoth job.
Craig Farmer, who manages those farms in Big Glory. Jeff Gwynn is MPI's Director of Readiness and Response. I asked him first of all to confirm the parasite is in Marlborough too.
It has since 2015 when it was first detected in New Zealand.
Okay. 14 farms in Big Glory Bay?
That's correct.
And how many of them have the parasite?
We have confirmed finds on 2 of them.
Okay, but because of the way the parasite works, you have reason to believe it will have spread?
Our science advice is quite clear. We see that as an epidemiological or disease unit. In essence, that means if one's got it, in all likelihood they've all got it, or will very shortly have it. And if that's guided our thinking. If we want to remove the tropical pressure, we need to remove all of the flat oysters out of that bay.
Which is easier said than done, isn't it? How will this happen?
We will be serving these notices of direction on Monday. We are going to come down and meet, my team and I will be going down to meet with the affected farmers on Tuesday.
Have you been previously?
Not me personally. We have a number of our staff down there, but I haven't personally.
On Stewart Island. So people from people...
Yeah, well, I have been to Stewart Island, but not in this capacity.
No, and since the contamination was discovered, since the parasite was discovered?
No, I haven't.
Has anyone from your team been?
Yes, we have people from our team have been there.
Okay, because there's a sense of real confusion. We've spoken to farmers who just really, whilst they understand the order and they certainly understand the reasons behind it, they just don't understand the logistics of how it's going to happen.
And they are probably the people we need to talk to, because they know their farms better than we do in terms of the logistics. And we are quite aware we have a challenge in front of us, and part of the reason for bringing the team down, at least in part, on Tuesday to talk to them, is to figure out exactly how we do this. Now, my preference is that the farmers are in the best position to remove their own stock, and there is opportunities for that stock to be sold if that's something they commercially want to do, as long as it meets certain protocols. But we've had numerous offers from the Bluff wider community, and although at this stage we're not asking for it, there may be an opportunity for the wider community to support with some of this work as we remove the oysters.
Is there a particular kind of expertise required? Because the oysters have to be removed in a way which ensures the parasite isn't released into the ocean and therefore into the strait.
Yes, you're correct. And when the affected farmers receive the notice of direction on Monday, they're also going to receive a very detailed technical and operational protocol, which we're going to work them through on Tuesday. But my preference is for them to have the information, to digest it, and then we can sit with them and actually work through the mechanics of how that's going to occur.
Compensation under the Biosecurity Act, what arrangements will be made for the farmers?
What we will be doing, you're quite right, compensation under the Biosecurity Act as a result of us exercising these powers will be available to these farmers. Part of the discussion on Tuesday will be walking them through the actual mechanics of that.
When was it discovered in Marlborough?
2015.
Hindsight is a marvellous thing. And I wasn't interviewing you at the time saying, why aren't you tearing these oysters out? But should you have done what you were about to do in Big Glory in Marlborough in 2015?
Look, I think hindsight is a wonderful thing, as you say. At the time, the science advice was the same.
The science advice, so you were advised to take them out?
That was the science advice at the time. And that drives a lot of our decision making, but like any decision, there's a bunch of factors considered.
Jeff, forgive me for interrupting. So you were advised in 2015 to take the oysters out in Marlborough. That was the science advice. You said to me the other day you listened to the science advice. Why didn't you listen to it in 2015?
We did listen to it. What I'm trying to explain is the fact that we considered other factors which included geographical location and tide and current. And the decision made at the time was a controlled area notice, that the the permitting and surveillance regime would be sufficient to manage spread.
Jeff Gwynn, MPI Readiness and Response Director, Rolliston. It's 25.5 to 6, and let's go to Katrina with the headlines on a pretty amazing day.
Yes, Britain has a hung parliament tonight following the snap election. The Conservatives are almost 50 seats ahead of Labour, but the BBC says it's already clear they can't win the 326 seats needed for a clear majority. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, is expected to make a speech at Downing Street in a few hours' time. The government says a United Nations request for more information on New Zealand's involvement in a raid on 2 Afghan villages in 2010 is based on factual inaccuracies. The UN Committee on Torture has requested a further investigation of the raids, which were discussed in the book Hit and Run. Government Minister Chris Finlayson today apologised for the invasion of Parihaka in Taranaki and the illegal imprisonment of its men. And for the first time, the atrocities committed against Parihaka women by colonial forces have been recognised. The Labour Party will ban farmers from intensifying their operations unless they have resource consent. Labour today launched its new freshwater policy, which it says will bring better rules and better regulation to improve water quality within 5 years. A 36-year-old Canadian man has been arrested over the importing of $5 million of methamphetamine found hidden inside a consignment of candles. Customs officers at the International Mail Centre this week intercepted a package of home accessories sent from Canada. The Corrections Department will pay more than $3,000 to the convicted murderer Philip Smith after a court ruled his rights had been breached when it prevented him wearing a toupee. The hairpiece was removed from him after he used it as a disguise when he ran away to Brazil while on temporary release from prison in November 2014. 6 more people have been arrested over the death of a 19-year-old man in Invercargill. The police say the man died after being seriously assaulted at Stadium Southland on Wednesday. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Let's turn to Nona Peltier to end the week in the studio with us. Thanks, Nona. Just fascinating. Real pressure mounting on Theresa May this morning. Ed Miliband saying she's a goner.
That's what they're saying.
What's the pound done?
Well, the pound has had quite a big drop, biggest drop since January in one single day. At one stage, it was down 2% against the US dollar, against the New Zealand dollar, just in the last little while since the confirmation has come about the hung parliament. We saw the British pound was 1.5% down against the Kiwi, and now it's 1.8%. And goodness knows what's going to happen through the rest of the trading day in Europe and, of course, the United States.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because no one knows what's going on. And they don't know once again. Gosh, yes, once again. They don't know who the Prime Minister is going to be. They also don't know what this means for Brexit. I mean, now Brexit could be negotiated by somebody who is going to do a much softer Brexit, right?
Most likely. Yeah. That's what the punters are saying.
Yeah.
And I guess you spoke to some of the person who's taken the bets on that. Yeah, no, it's true. And so what's going to happen, it's hard to say, but uncertainty is going to create more volatility in the markets. We've seen some of that over the last little while coming out of the U.S., first of all, with the FBI, former FBI director, Comey talking about Trump. That didn't seem to have too much of an impact. I guess Wall Street thought, I guess he's not really a threat to Trump's future. Maybe something else will arise, but it won't be that. And so it sort of studied the market. The New Zealand dollar, though, is reacting in a sense that it's like, okay, here's a calm in the sea, and the New Zealand dollar has really moved up, and it's been holding those gains. It's now trading above 72 cents US, and it was doing that this morning. It's still there. It's also 95.7 against the Australian, 56.7 against the pence, and the euro. There was some movement on the euro as well, with the European Central Bank holding rates steady and then not signaling that it's going to stop the quantitative easing. So that sort of capped the euro at 0.643 euro against the New Zealand dollar. So lots of interest there in the markets. In terms of the share market, well, that remains to be seen. We're just going to see the markets now opening in London, and the US is yet to open. So back here, though, our top 50 index fell nearly 1/3% by 23 points at 7,000. 436. You can expect a lot of news next week. Got GDP numbers, balance of payment, U.S. Federal Reserve on interest rates. So, yeah, we'll watch this space.
And maybe a new Prime Minister in the UK.
Could be.
Nona Peltier, thanks so much, Nona. Have a great weekend.
And you.
It's coming up to 20 to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. What an extraordinary day it has been. Team New Zealand are through the America's Cup Challenger final. They won 2 of their 3 races today to eliminate Sir Ben Ainsley's British syndicate and cement New Zealand's 30-year Cup record of making either the Challenger final or the Cup final itself. Zach Fleming with the details.
Beers in hand, New Zealand flags waving, ecstatic fans welcome their team back ashore.
Touch and go there for a while, but, you know, it's all good.
It wasn't smooth sailing. An equipment failure at the start of today's first race sent hearts racing, bringing back still fresh memories of Wednesday's crash. The boat came to a dead stop after its daggerboard rose out of the water, giving Britain's BAR a more than 20-second lead. Skipper Glenn Ashby reassured fans after the race it was nothing to do with the capsize earlier in the week.
We had a little bit of water in the leeward cockpit, and something sort of fell off and pressed one of the buttons, which actually pulled the daggerboard up right at the wrong time in the pre-start.
But digging deep, the crew clawed back, clinching the first race. 2 races to go, Team New Zealand needed just 1 more win to go through to the final.
The second race, to be honest, we sailed like a bucket of spanners. You know, we basically couldn't have made it any worse for ourselves if we tried. So a lot of lessons and good takeaways to debrief.
Behind from start to finish, BAR won by a convincing 20 seconds, making it 4 races to 2. The third and final race of the day was class from start to finish. Skipper Glenn Ashby beaming at the performance.
It's a really clinical display of getting off the start line well and sailing the boat really accurately and playing a few shifts well. So that was by far our best sailing of the day. The win today was really the win for the shore team. They did a stellar job the last 48 hours from really having the boat in pieces 48 hours ago to actually being back on the water and be able to go out there and sheet it on and sail the boat hard today.
But it wasn't just the efforts of the shore team. Ashby says the new cycle grinders put in some serious work.
Carlo Houseman, one of our cyclists today, did sort of the warm-up this morning, 2 races, and then we went out and did some training afterwards. So he's certainly is probably the equivalent of riding from Auckland to the Coromandel, I think, today, from what he's actually done with his legs.
The team will have a much-needed day off tomorrow.
A lot of debriefing to go through with our boat handling, but we'll get onto that over the next couple of days and look forward to having a little bit of a sleep in, hopefully tomorrow morning.
The best of 9 Challenger final starts on Sunday. Whether their rival will be Sweden's Artemis Racing or SoftBank Team Japan, skippered by Dean Barker, will be decided when those teams go head-to-head tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
The Christchurch man who murdered a 15-month-old boy will spend at least 17 years in prison. Troy Kevin Taylor, who was 24, was found guilty by a jury in March of murdering and assaulting Ihaka Stokes at their Brindua home in 2015. Taylor was the partner of the boy's mother, Michaela Stokes. He was sentenced to life in prison with a 17-year non-parole period at the High Court in Christchurch today. Our reporter Maya Burry was there.
Michaela Stokes cried as she read a victim impact statement, which was not allowed to be recorded, in court today. She said she was still coming to terms with the fact she would never hold Ihaka again, and she wished they could swap places. Ms. Stokes said she thought Taylor was a loving, kind and respectful person, but she was wrong. She said she would be more protective and cautious about who she allowed near her second child, who she was heavily pregnant with when Ihaka died. Her father, Paul Stokes, said every day has been a struggle since the toddler's death.
Every day I'm trying to be strong for my family, but it's so hard, and I just want to be able to grieve. No matter what happens today, nothing will bring Ihaka back.
Ihaka died shortly after being rushed to Christchurch Hospital on a Friday night with serious head injuries. Paul Stokes said he hasn't slept properly since that night, and he lies awake thinking of the good times he had with his grandson.
Whenever I see the Lotto commercial with the little boy in the pirate ship with his granddad, I get emotional, feel like crying, but I can't because I don't want to show my emotions. I'm blessed to have another grandson. When I cuddle him and he falls asleep on me, it reminds me of holding Ihaka in the hospital, which breaks my heart because Ihaka never woke.
During the 2-week trial in March, the Crown said repeated concussions Taylor had suffered had caused him to lash out and kill the boy. Justice Mander said a post-mortem examination found the child had suffered bruising to his head, swelling and hemorrhaging to his brain, and fractures to both his shoulder blades.
Stokes was awoken by you to find Parihaka lying unconscious and unresponsive in his cot. Parihaka had suffered grievous injuries as a result of deliberate force inflicted by you. It is not precisely clear how you inflicted or caused the fatal injuries, nor in what order the injuries were inflicted. But whatever the mechanism, it involved lethal force.
Today, Taylor's defence lawyer, Philip Shammy, said his client still maintained his innocence. Justice Mander said Taylor had never faced up to his actions, instead telling police Parihaka had fallen in his cot, and then at trial pointing the finger at the boy's mother.
You sought to exonerate yourself firstly by attempting to maintain the injuries were accidental, and when that was no longer available, you attempted to blame Parihaka's mother. In my view, that demonstrates a certain callousness and a certain disregard for Parihaka's family, and importantly, an inability by you to face up the enormity of your actions.
Justice Mander believed it was likely Taylor snapped from frustration from being unable to settle Parihaka, and the attack was a result of his sudden rage. He said the level of violence Taylor inflicted on a defenceless child he was meant to be caring for was an aggravating feature in the sentence that was handed down. Taylor won't be eligible for parole until 2034. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Let's go to the US now. President Trump will wake in the US to face front-page headlines that declare him, in essence, a liar. The president was assailed by former FBI Director James Comey during testimony on Capitol Hill yesterday. But President Trump's lawyer insists it's Mr. Comey who isn't telling the truth. Our Washington correspondent Simon Marks says both men can't be right.
James Comey's testimony on Capitol Hill was as devastating as the country had been led to expect. President Trump, he said, had a string of inappropriate conversations with him that threatened to pierce the political independence of the FBI director and the Bureau itself. He wanted Mr. Comey to terminate the investigation into ties between National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and the Russians. He asked Mr. Comey to help lift the cloud that was hanging over the White House, and he wanted a loyalty pledge, and when he didn't get it, he fired Mr. Comey and then lied about why he'd done it.
By saying that the organization was in disarray, that it was poorly led, that the workforce had lost confidence in its leader. Those were lies, plain and simple.
The woman who promulgated those falsehoods on the president's behalf, his Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, in an off-camera briefing, pushed back against Mr. Comey's claims and the reporters who were raising them.
No, I can definitively say the president's not a liar. I think it's frankly insulting that question would be asked.
But the White House knows the question isn't going to go away. And so President Trump's lawyer, Mark Kasowitz, offered the president's formal response that everything James Comey had said under oath before the Senate Intelligence Committee was itself a lie. The president never demanded loyalty and never asked Mr. Comey to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn.
The president never, in form or substance, directed or suggested that Mr. Comey stop investigating anyone, including the president never suggested that Mr. Comey, quote, let Flynn go, close quote.
He also slammed Mr. Comey for conceding that he had leaked information to the press after he was fired. It's not clear that was, as the Trump team contends, a criminal act, since by then Mr. Comey was a private citizen. This then is now a straightforward battle between the president's version of events and Mr. Comey's, and one of them cannot be telling the truth. It will fall to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller to try and determine which one of them is lying. His investigation and all the other probes underway on Capitol Hill are likely to continue for months, meaning that one thing is certain. If by firing his FBI director, Donald Trump hoped to untangle himself from the Russia investigation, his presidency has, in fact, only become further mired in it. For Checkpoint, I'm Simon Marks in Washington.
We're going to Parihaka shortly, but first, the United Nations Committee Against Torture has issued our government a please explain over its involvement in a raid on 2 Afghan villages in 2010. In the book Hit and Run, published in March, journalists Parihaka and John Stevenson claimed SAS troops were involved in the raids, during which 6 civilians died and 15 were wounded. But Foreign Minister Jerry Brownlee says the request doesn't change anything. Zach Fleming has more.
Please indicate what measures have been put in place to ensure that all allegations relating to Operation Burnham will be fully investigated and addressed. A request from the United Nations Committee Against Torture to the government.
It seems clear to me that they are saying that they believe on the face of it that the issues that were raised in the book about civilian deaths, the mistreatment and torture of a prisoner have not been dealt with, and that they're calling on the government to provide detailed information about what has been done to fully address those claims.
John Stevenson, co-author of the book Hit and Run along with Parihaka, he says he had nothing to do with the request but would be happy to give evidence if asked. It's one of 34 torture issues the UN has asked New Zealand to respond to. All 161 countries in the Convention against it are given a list every few years. Executive Director of Amnesty International Grant Bailden has used the request to renew calls for an independent inquiry, something Prime Minister Bill English has repeatedly rejected.
This puts the New Zealand government on notice that if it doesn't instigate its own proper independent inquiry, there are international mechanisms that will start to kick in. And what we've seen here from the Committee Against Torture is just one of those, but there could be others, such as the International Criminal Court could choose to investigate.
The Hit and Run book claimed 6 civilians were killed instead of insurgents in a raid of 2 villages in Baghlan province in Afghanistan by our defence forces on August the 22nd, 2010. It also claimed homes were destroyed, wounded people were not treated, and a prisoner was mistreated. When the book was released, Wayne Mapp, who was the Defence Minister in 2010, said, quote, "As a nation, we owe it to ourselves to find out." But Foreign Minister Jerry Brownlee told political reporter May Heron the allegations have been disproven and no inquiry will be launched.
We will be making it clear that our viewers, that the allegation that they have picked up on was based on erroneous facts.
So I'm just trying to clarify, obviously, this response. So the reply basically from New Zealand will be that your process that you've requested is not needed because what you are basing.
Well, you're not writing a response.
I'm just trying to clarify it, if that makes sense. I'm trying to clarify.
No, you're not. No, with all due respect, you're not clarifying. You're trying to, in my opinion, get me to say something that you would like me to say. What I'm very firmly saying to you is that there are 33 different matters or questions that have been raised in by the committee for New Zealand to deal with and respond to over the next 2 years, and we will do that.
Co-author John Stevenson continues to call for an independent inquiry.
Obviously, I can't comment on what Jerry Brownlee is trying to say, but if he is suggesting that the issues that were raised in our book have been fully addressed and dealt with, he's simply not telling the truth.
The government has 2 years to respond to the UN's request. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Nearly 140 years ago, the peaceful settlement of Parihaka, south of New Plymouth, was sacked by Crown troops and its men jailed without trial in the South Island, and the women who were left behind raped. In 1881, the Taranaki settlement had become a symbol of peaceful resistance against land confiscation under the leadership of prophets Te Whiti, Orongamai and Tohu Kakahi. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Shannon Haunui Thompson was in Parihaka for the apology and signing of the reconciliation settlement.
Rain fell lightly as women openly wept when Parihaka Papakainga Trust Chair Puna Wano Bryant described what happened to her tupuna, especially the women.
The poi that will support this kōrero muriaiai is about our women who were raped and assaulted by Crown troops. Those women were our mothers, our grandmothers. From here, and the violation of whakapapa happened here.
After her speech, Poi Manu, or the woman of Parihaka, sang an old lament, which was about a young girl being molested. We were asked not to record the waiata, but people openly cried while it was being performed. Ms. Wano Bryant says the history of what happened to the men at Parihaka was well known, but what happened to the women wasn't really talked about much.
The woman and the rape of the woman, their story was silenced because of the shame that goes along with that act. And so when Te Whiti came back from the jails down south, he said, "Nā wai nei kōpurapura." Who are these speckled potatoes? The children playing on the papakainga, because they were obviously Māori and Pākehā children. So it's in our lineage, it's in our whakapapa, it's in our waiata. The Crown recognising our waiata and our whakapapa as historical fact is hugely significant. We weren't asked to prove or convince the Crown of the fact that that did happen.
This is the first time the Crown has acknowledged the rape and molestation of women at Parihaka. The Attorney-General and Treaty Minister, Chris Finlayson, says this is what happened.
We put a lot of work into that. We had to look at that very carefully because it's a hugely significant acknowledgement, and it hasn't been acknowledged before. But, to quote Thomas Gradgrind, the facts give me the facts, and the facts occurred here. That's what happened.
Former Prime Minister Jim Bolger was brought up in Taranaki and says he knew little of what had happened at the papakainga when he was a boy.
Tremendous day for Parihaka, but really for New Zealand. This has so much symbolism in it because what happened in 1881 was so draconian and so wrong. And to see the reconciliation, the understanding here today, I think is quite a testimony to modern New Zealand.
After the apology, people of Parihaka, Crown and local community members signed a legacy statement and the reconciliation package. The legacy statement contains the history of Parihaka and what happened at the papakainga. The Parihaka Papakainga Trust will also get $9 million. Parihaka trustee Ruakere Hond hopes the package will help his people move forward.
This is the beginning of something special for Parihaka, to be able to come out from the cloud of darkness that was been on this place for all these years. And so this is the beginning of that new dawn for us.
Some of the money will be spent renovating buildings at Parihaka. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Shannon Hainui Thompson, ahau.
Kia ora, Shan. It's 3 minutes to 6. An inmate who took part in a violent attack on 6 guards at Auckland Prison in Paremarima has been sentenced to 7 years, 10 months jail. Patrick Waru had earlier pleaded guilty to 13 charges relating to the incident involving 3 other inmates, which happened in a gang-run wing of the prison last October. Our reporter Carla Penman was at the sentencing in the High Court in Auckland, and I asked her what part Waru played in the attacks on the guards.
So the role that Waru played was in conjunction with 3 other inmates. So basically what happened, it was October 16 last year, and they were let out of their cells to stretch their legs and socialise. They asked a guard to go get them a mop and a bucket, which isn't unusual apparently. And then when the guard came back, they launched on him, punching him, stomping on him, etc. And then one by one, more guards got involved, turned into quite a pile-up type situation. And Waru himself his part really was, he had 2 sharpened makeshift shanks tied to his hands with bed sheets, and he used those to stab several guards in the head, neck and face area. And I think it's important to note as well that the nature of that particular wing where him and the other inmates were from, apparently it was commonplace for there to be weapons all the time, as it was also run by the Killer Bees gang.
So utterly premeditated if he had this stuff tied to him. So he was good to go. This wasn't a spur of the moment thing. This had been planned and orchestrated. So therefore, what did the judge say?
So it was definitely premeditated in the sense that they made the weapons and they planned to launch at him in this way during that break. But in terms of what the judge said, he went over his criminal history, saying it was appalling. From birth, he'd been put in SIFS care, gone through so many foster homes, had been in court since the age of 14, had been in jail since the age of 16, and now he's 26 and has only been out for 2 months in the last 10 years. The judge also referred to his part in the Spring Hill prison riots in 2013, where he was involved in assaults with a blunt instrument and threatened to kill and other sort of things like that. So he was involved in that side of things. And also the judge referred to 3 victim impact statements of the 3 of the 6 prison guards, saying that basically they were left financially out of pocket because they had to spend weeks out of work, they were hospitalised, they've lost all trust in inmates and don't want to build any relationships. So when the sentence was handed down, there was 7 years and 10 months on top of what he's already serving.
On top of?
Yes.
Gosh, so he's in for a long, long time.
Yes. And he actually told his lawyer that his hope was to get out of jail by the time he was 40.
Carla Behrman coming up to the news at 6. We're going back to the UK after the news at 6. A Conservative MP said we shot ourselves in the head, not the foot. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. Britain's snap general election has resulted in a hung parliament. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, who went into the election with a 17-seat majority, has won just over 300 seats, well short of the 326 required for a clear majority. The Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, says people have turned their backs on austerity and it was time for Mrs May to resign. The Conservative MP, Stephen Crabb, acknowledged it was a bad result.
Clearly, something has gone awry here. We set out on this election campaign wanting to provide the country with more stability, more unity ahead of the Brexit negotiations, and we're emerging with a situation in Parliament where there's more divisions and less stability.
Conservative MP Stephen Crabb. Theresa May is due to speak about 9 o'clock New Zealand time. Joe Crilly from the bookmakers William Hill told Checkpoint betting on whether she'll remain as leader of the Conservatives and Prime Minister has been suspended.
Should she go, Boris Johnson is the favourite to take over 9-4. With Amber Rudd, who managed to keep her seat by around about 300 votes. So a very tight one there. Amber Rudd is the 5-1 second favourite, so it certainly looks like a 2-horse race between those two.
Joe Crilly says the betting is now odds on that there'll be another election later this year. The government denies it's being asked by the United Nations to investigate New Zealand's involvement in a raid on 2 Afghan villages in 2010. The UN Committee Against Torture has asked for evidence that all allegations relating to the operation were fully investigated and addressed. The book Hit and Run, published in March, claimed SAS troops were involved in the raids, during which 6 civilians died and 15 were wounded. The Prime Minister subsequently ruled out an inquiry, saying there was no sound basis for one. The Foreign Minister, Jerry Brownlee, says the committee is asking the question based on factual inaccuracies written in the book. However, he says the government will respond to the request for information. A Stewart Island oyster farmer is unhappy about the short notice he's getting to cull his oysters. The Ministry for Primary Industries has confirmed it's ordering a cull of farmed oysters on the island to try to stop the spread of the deadly parasite Bonamia austriae. The infection was discovered a fortnight ago, but Rodney Clark says he was only contacted by government officials today. Mr Clark says the decision to cull all of the area's flat oyster stock could mean the end of his 14-year-old business.
We're finished. We pack our bags and say, well, 14 years of accumulating a wealth of knowledge. The only phone call I've had was the one that advising me that all of our stock would be taken out, and then they'd talk to us about compensation. I laughed because they told me we could still keep our hatchery. Why would we grow flat oysters now?
Stewart Island oyster farmer Rodney Clark. The Labour Party will ban farmers from intensifying their operations unless they have a resource consent. Labour has launched its new freshwater policy, which it says will improve water quality within 5 years. It says within a generation, even the most grossly polluted rivers and lakes will be cleaned up. Labour will also implement a new national policy statement for freshwater management that will ensure rivers and lakes are clean enough for people to swim in over summer. It says it will also take action against controversial farming practices to protect waterways, wetlands and estuaries. A Parihaka Papakainga trustee says the prophets Te Whiti o Rongamai and Tohu Kākahi would be ecstatic at the Crown apology for the sacking of the Taranaki settlement in 1881. The Treaty Negotiations Minister, Chris Finlayson, today apologised for the invasion of Parihaka and the illegal imprisonment of its men. He also apologised for the atrocities committed against Parihaka women. Trustee Ruakere Hon says Te Whiti and Tohu would be overjoyed at the community's growing confidence and assertiveness.
They would take this and say, this is their legacy being fulfilled. These are the first steps, and what is ahead is the work we need to put in place to make that happen.
Ruakere Hon says there are long-term plans to make Parihaka a place of learning, but in the short time it needs urgent investment in basic infrastructure. The Corrections Department is to pay more than $3,000 to the convicted murderer Philip Smith after a court ruled his rights had been breached when it prevented him wearing a toupee. The hairpiece was taken away after he used it as a disguise when he fled to Brazil while on temporary release from prison in November 2014. The $3,000 Smith will receive covers disbursements incurred in his High Court battle over the hairpiece, including legal costs and the costs of purchasing phone cards and stationery. In a statement, the Corrections Department says disbursement payments are not subject to the Prisoners and Victims Claim Act, so legally the payment had to be made directly to Smith. It's 6:05. To sport, seamer Trent Boult says the Black Caps bowlers will take an aggressive approach into tonight's must-win Champions Trophy cricket clash with Bangladesh in Cardiff. New Zealand needs to win the match and hosts England need to beat Australia for the Black Caps to reach the semi-finals. Boult says they'll be trying to remove Bangladesh's dangerous top order as quickly as possible.
We all know the importance of getting wickets early in the innings and putting the team under pressure is where you can really set the game up for people. So that's the challenge. We'll look to come hard at their top order, which has been playing very well. But if we can do that, I'm sure we can set up a decent total to chase down or obviously set.
Trent Boult. The game starts at 9:30 p.m. New Zealand's top-ranked doubles players Michael Venus says his French Open semi-final tonight will be no easy feat. Venus is the first New Zealander to make a Grand Slam semi-final since 1995. Alongside partner Ryan Harrison, Venus will take on Juan Sebastian Cabal and Robert Farah in the semi-final tonight. Venus and Harrison get a share of more than $200,000 for making the semis. Meanwhile, the men's finalists will be found at the French Open tonight, with Andy Murray playing Stan Wawrinka and Rafael Nadal playing Dominic Thiem. And the New Zealand women's rugby team lead Canada 14-8 at half-time in their match at Wellington Stadium. The second half has just started. The Chiefs Hurricanes game will follow straight after it. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning we'll take a look at the British election results. I'll talk to the woman some see as the next president of Uganda, and how big data can make psychotherapy more effective. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
But I think we're bigger. Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui and Taupo. Cloudy periods developing later. A few showers in the west overnight and morning, then clearing later tomorrow. Taranaki to Kapiti Coast and Taihape. Cloudy periods, a few showers developing overnight, then clearing later tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, mainly fine. Cloudy periods and isolated showers spreading north tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, however showers for coastal Marlborough tomorrow morning. Nelson and Westland, cloudy periods and isolated showers becoming confined to coastal Bulla tomorrow and clearing elsewhere. Canterbury Central and North Otago, fine. A few cloudy periods tomorrow with isolated morning showers about Otago and coastal Canterbury. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, rain spreading north this evening, possibly thundery in the south, followed by squally showers easing tomorrow. Gale westerlies in the south at times, and the Chatham Islands often cloudy and a few showers. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
Katrina Batten with the news. I'm just looking at a stream of tweets on the Guardian website. Blame game well underway. Conservative sources say David Davis was the cabinet minister who pushed hardest for the snap poll. Of course, Theresa May owned it, although did a very poor job polling on it. Heather Stewart from the Guardian, very good journalist, says senior Conservative tells me of Davis there are a lot of very pissed off people in cabinet and with him in particular. And Chris Mason from the BBC is quoted as having talked to a Conservative MP, Nigel Evans, who said, we didn't shoot ourselves in the foot, we shot ourselves in the head. Quite an extraordinary state of affairs. Remember, the Tories had an absolute overall majority. They could govern in their own right. They blew it. Now they don't. It is a hung parliament. They went to the UK 3 years before they had to. At the moment, I am looking at the tally, and they have 313 seats. That's down 13. Labour have 260. That's up 31. Still a couple to be counted. Let's take the BBC's Norman Smith wrapping what's happened overnight.
Although the Conservatives are set to remain the largest party, Mrs May has suffered a stunning personal and political reverse, one that now raises serious doubts as to whether she can remain as Prime Minister and Tory leader. For the Conservatives, the hoped breakthrough in Labour's heartlands failed to materialise, as many of those Labour supporters who deserted to UKIP returned to back Jeremy Corbyn, while in Remain voting constituencies, the Tories suffered significant losses, losing seats like Battersea, Warwick and Canterbury, with swings of up to 10% to Labour. A strained-looking Mrs May hinted she would seek to remain as Prime Minister, saying the country needed stability. But the Conservative MP, Anna Soubry, said Mrs May had to take responsibility for the outcome.
I think she's in a very difficult place. She's a remarkable and she's a very talented woman, and she doesn't shy from difficult decisions, but she now has to obviously consider her position. Obviously, we haven't had all the results. We need to see where we are. But Theresa did put her mark on this campaign. She takes responsibility, as she always does, and I know she will, for the running of the campaign as well. It was a tightly knit group, and it was her group that ran this campaign.
Labour and Jeremy Corbyn defied all expectations. Mr Corbyn said it was time for a government that was truly representative of the country, and this was the reaction of the party's deputy leader, Tom Watson.
One thing can be sure. Theresa May's authority has been undermined by this election. She is a damaged Prime Minister whose reputation may never recover.
The former Lib Dem leader, Nick Clegg, lost his seat, although a clutch of former senior Lib Dems were returned, including Vince Cable and Ed Davey. UKIP suffered a dismal night, with their leader, Paul Nuttall, failing to get elected, while the party's former leader, Nigel Farage, said he feared the result reopened the debate over Brexit and a possible second referendum.
What's remarkable about Corbyn's achievement is he's getting Remainers in London voting for him, but he's getting UKIP voters around the rest of the country voting for him too. Now, of course, he's not going to be able to form a government on his own if it works out that way, but if we get a coalition with him and the SNP and whoever else, then we may well be looking down the barrel of a second referendum.
It's an election which, with just over a week to go before the crucial Brexit talks begin, has once again plunged Britain into uncertainty.
The BBC's Norman Smith. I don't know what noise that was. I'd like to say it absolutely unequivocally it wasn't me. We are waiting for a statement from Theresa May. It's not going to happen in our time, though, before 6:30. Obviously, it's coming up to 7:30 in the UK, but RNZ News will update you on what's happening throughout the night. The government has ordered the cull of all farmed oysters on Stewart Island in an effort to stop the spread of the deadly parasite. Since the disease was found a fortnight ago, Bluff's oyster industry has been pushing hard for a complete cull in order to save wild oyster stocks. The chairman of the Bluff Oyster and Food Festival, John Edmonston, echoes the sentiments of many Stewart Island oyster farmers Checkpoint has spoken to today. All say MPI should have made the call to remove Big Glory Bay oysters earlier.
To me, it's a no-brainer if they can get them out of the road. And what was explained by the scientist, it is the only option really. They can take the rotten apple out and hope like hell they save the barrel. The severity of the problem is, well, it could be disastrous for down here. It could be disastrous for the oysters and for economics, the whole lot. It could be disastrous for everybody down here, and they could have made the decision a lot earlier, I feel.
John Edmonston, our Otago Southern reporter Ian Telfer was in Stewart Island covering the story, and he was there as the announcement was made. So we grabbed him immediately by live view and asked him how locals along with the wider oyster farm community were reacting to the news.
So at the moment what they're being told is that the mussels that are there, mussel farms as well, can stay, but that every oyster, not just from the 2 infected farms, but in fact from all of the oyster farms in Big Glory Bay will have to be eradicated, removed in order to try and stop the parasite spreading. Now that news is just sinking in. Obviously they're pretty shell shocked because this is livelihoods that they've been building up over 10 or 15 years. Some of these farms are not that big, but others are fairly significant, and there's certainly a major income stream for people here, and they simply don't know what the future looks like now.
Ian, is there a sense of the logistics around how this will happen? You talked about mussels being allowed to stay, oysters having to go. Some farmers, of course, do both, and they're on the same lines in some cases. How on earth do you get the oysters out? Is anyone talking about that?
Oh, they are talking about that, John, very much so. Some of them don't believe it's even that easy, or in fact perhaps not even that possible, because they're saying exactly that the mussels and the oysters are intertwined. In fact, some of them have gone to situations where they sow the oysters every 200 millimetres, say, along the mussel lines in between the mussels, and the mussels themselves hold the oysters in. And so they say it's all very well for a decision to be made that we're going to rip them all out, but in fact that means taking all the mussels as well, and that is another huge harvest that they will lose. As well as that, there's just the logistical difficulties of getting this much material out, and of course they're aware they need to do it safely and stop any parasite from getting out at the same time. So they need containment vessels possibly. They're talking about whether they're going to need special boats. They're saying they don't have the equipment here really. They're saying Sanford, the biggest farmer, has probably got its own equipment, but they don't, and they'd have to get in barges, they'd have to get in other material and specialist experts, all of that. They don't know where that money's going to come for that. They don't even know how long it would take or how possible it is. And at the moment they're pretty frustrated that MPI haven't been on the island, they say, once since the announcement was made last week, and nor have they had any real direct contact until today with what they should be doing.
Ian, you have a pretty unique insight into how people are feeling there, because today you're on Stewart Island, yesterday you were in Bluff. What is the majority opinion? Was there a kind of terrible inevitability about this happening?
Yes. So there's 2 emotions, I think. There's a resignation now, to some extent, about Bonamia, about this parasite having got here. They believe that it's only a matter of time before it shifts to Bluff. In Bluff, they still are hoping that's not the case. They still believe that maybe Stewart Island, culling all of the oysters here, would save them. But the people in Stewart Island don't have that confidence. They say they understand that they need to do their part. They definitely don't want it spreading to Bluff, and they're not oblivious to the threat. But they say they don't believe that it's just a Stewart Island problem. They believe, for instance, that it's probably already in the Bluff oystery and just hasn't been detected yet. And they believe that even if all their oysters are ripped out, they believe that the process of ripping them out at the very least will mean that the waters are infected and that inevitably that will spread. So there's a bit of scepticism, I have to say, here. They're not trying to be nasty to the Bluff people, and they're willing to do their shot, but they're just saying they're not convinced yet that this will be a measure that will be effective. They fear that it'll be futile.
Ian Telfer, just after the news broke earlier today on what looked like a beautiful day on Stewart Island, the Auckland Regional Dental Service is none the wiser as to who wrongly connected a pipe at a South Auckland dental clinic, potentially exposing more than 2,000 children to unsterilised water containing blood and saliva. Findings from an independent investigation into the incident at a Pukekohe Intermediate Dental Clinic have been released. Laura Tupou has more.
On the evening of the 31st of January, RNZ News broke the story that the county's Manukau District Health Board would be reaching out to the families of children who had been treated at the clinic between last September and January. It offered to test children for blood-borne viral infections, including hepatitis B, hepatitis C and HIV. Affected parents were outraged to find out through the media. A summary report of the investigation found the communication with parents was well managed, but one parent, Stuart Johnstone, disputes that.
Finding out about it through the media, first of all, is not handling it well. Our daughter was actually tested before we were actually phoned by anyone in regards to this, and then I think my wife actually received three or four phone calls where the people didn't seem to realise that we'd already been phoned. So, that aspect of it was not handled well.
Mr Johnstone, who's the father of a 6-year-old girl who had to be tested, says the lack of communication continued today when he was contacted by RNZ News about the report, not the DHB.
We haven't heard back from anyone since those few phone calls that we had regarding the situation. So I'd begun to wonder, what had happened, if there was a report, where things were up to. And so, it was actually very good to find out that there is, but it's still disturbing that we're finding out about that through the media, not through official channels.
RNZ News made several attempts to talk to someone from the Auckland Regional Dental Service, but were told no one was available to comment. The investigation was unable to pinpoint who would have caused the hose mix-up. It said that in January this year, an unknown staff member went into the plant room and saw a disconnected hose with one end submerged in wastewater. They attached it to the compressor air intake nozzle under the presumption they were correcting a fault. It says the person was likely someone without technical knowledge, but the report says it wasn't unusual for staff to fix equipment. Despite this, Stuart Johnstone says there's no reason to place blame, but wants to see better training in place so this doesn't happen again.
Even if they do know or they don't know, that person knows that they did the wrong thing. So long as that person learns from that, I don't think there's any need for a witch hunt and to hang someone out to dry for this.
The report summary says because the clinic is in a rural area, there would also be an additional call-out service cost, which led staff to fix equipment, something Mr Johnstone says is terribly concerning.
You're dealing with people's children at this dental clinic. Getting the equipment fixed and checked should just be automatic.
Of the 2,139 children contacted for screening, one family is yet to be seen. An action taken since the investigation includes limiting access to the plant room. Further clarity over the responsibilities of the clinic's equipment and management, including staff training, are still to come. The clinic reopened to the public on Tuesday this week. Mo te hotaka o te ahiahi ko Laura Tupou ho.
The Education Council says some teachers cannot read, write or do maths well enough to do their job properly. It's proposing higher standards for entry to teacher education as part of an overall overhaul of the sector. The council says from 2020 people wanting to become teachers should pass a literacy test and have more credits in numeracy and at a higher level of NCEA than is currently the case. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
The council says it has anecdotal evidence some new teachers aren't fully effective because their literacy and numeracy isn't good enough. That's despite the fact they had to have university entrance or its equivalent in order to get into a teacher education program in the first place. Kevin Bush from the Auckland Primary Principals Association says its members have seen the problem firsthand.
There are some teachers who are not good candidates to have in front of the classroom. Sometimes that is related to their literacy and numeracy levels, and sometimes it is just that they really don't have what it takes to be a teacher.
Kevin Bush says a higher entry standard is a great idea, but he worries it would leave schools with too few new teachers.
The problem is that we don't have the number of people wanting to get into teaching because they look at teaching and they think, that's not the career I want, that's not the lifestyle I want.
You're saying if they raised the standard, there'd be too few people coming into teacher training programs?
Quite possibly. There's too few as it is now.
Peter Reynolds from the Early Childhood Council says poor literacy and numeracy is not a common problem, but it needs to be resolved.
It is somewhat disturbing to find learning stories written in abbreviated English, such as text speak. that sort of thing doesn't impart an awful lot of confidence in the quality of the teaching standards in New Zealand, and we need to see some improvement in those areas.
Linda Stewart from the NZEI says good maths and literacy are important, but she urges caution because some people who struggle with maths go on to become great teachers.
Some of the people that I have seen best, particularly in maths, not so much in writing, but particularly in maths, are the people who really remember struggling with maths when they were at school and struggled with maths when they were at training college. And actually, they do an amazing job of teaching kids maths.
The Education Council has also suggested more teachers trained to work across a range of sectors, for example with under fives and school children. But the spokesman for University's Deans of Education, John O'Neill, says previous experience of such courses indicates they might not work well in practice.
Sometimes in the sector they're perceived as being neither early childhood teachers nor primary teachers. So the logic of having a flexible qualification that means you can teach in a number of sectors is a good thing, but if the sector's not receptive to that, then you may not be setting graduates up for their best employment prospects.
The Education Council is taking submissions on the proposed changes until July the 7th. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
Let's head to Christchurch now, where the government's buyout of 9,000 of the worst quake-affected properties resulted in mass migration to Christchurch's fringes, the red zoning, of course. This shift has been most pronounced just south of the city at Rolliston. The once sleepy settlement has been transformed to a bustling satellite town thanks to its population surging by nearly half, 47%, since 2008. It's a rapid increase. As part of RNZ's election year series, Is This the Brighter Future? Conan Young talks to some of those people who have made the move about their new home.
In 2008, just 38,000 people called the Selwyn district, of which Rolliston is by far the largest settlement, home. There was a small supermarket and a pub, but not much else. The population has now grown to 56,000 and brought with it more shops, including 2 large supermarkets and an impressive new swimming pool complex. This year, it got its own high school with a 200-strong roll that's expected to hit 1,100 within the next 4 years. Kim Gargett knows better than most just how much the place has changed.
Interesting. I lived here when I was a kid, and it's a lot different to what it is now.
What was it like when you were a kid?
Well, there was nothing here except for a dairy and a fire station.
This man moved from Christchurch 5 years ago and says it's the people who live here that make the difference.
People are friendly. You don't get too many people stopping you on the road and asking you things. except where's such and such a street? It's growing so fast you can't keep up with them all.
Juliana Wilcox moved here with her husband and 2 sons 6 years ago and says she prefers it to Christchurch.
More open, not congested. Kids absolutely love it, love their sports. Can't fault it.
But she says things have definitely changed since they arrived.
The growth has been enormous. Like, we used to live in a no exit street. They've opened it all up and we've got like 3 new subdivisions down the end of our street now. So one of our reasons why we wanted to live where we lived is because of the no exit street. But oh well, can't have everything now.
Another mother of 2 says Rolliston has become more self-sufficient in the 2 years she's been there.
It's quite good because you sort of feel like you don't have to go into town the same. Like when you first got here, probably good travel to town on the weekends, but now there's sort of lots happening out here that you don't really need to go into town the same.
There are a few more shops and things here. What's here, say, now compared to when you first moved out?
Obviously the warehouse is bigger. What's going to be bigger is, chemists, coffee culture, restaurants.
Loretta Adams says the booming population growth has its pros and cons.
There's a lot more shops coming here now because of the increase of the population, but sort of the crime rate's gone up a little bit too. But I guess that happens everywhere.
But while Rolliston is family friendly, the pace is a little too slow for some, including Jason Lambourne.
I've noticed this is quite a family orientated sort of area, so not a lot of young people or single people out these ways. So if you want to sort of go and have a few beers or whatever with some friends and catch up, often you've got to go into town to do that.
Ian Tucker visited Rolliston during the last Lions tour to New Zealand and never went back to the UK. His family came too, and his children have grown up here. Ian says the new high school was long overdue.
Well, my wife works in one of the original school. When she started, there was 300 people there, and there's over 800 in that one alone. There's 4 other schools, a high school. There's another school getting built down there. But yeah, it needs to be that way because it's good that the high school's here because Lincoln was just overflowing. My kids went to Lincoln School in the last couple of years, and and they said it was chocker then. So only dread to think what it's like now. So, but that's a good thing. All the kids. Most of the kids around here walk to school. So that's ideal.
For this Rolliston resident, the only downside is the traffic.
I can get to work in 20 minutes if you leave at the right time. If you leave at the wrong time, it can take you about 45, 50 minutes. But once the motorway's done, you'll be laughing.
Prime Minister Norman Kirk in the 1970s dubbed Rolliston the town of the future, with the moniker becoming a standing joke for anybody driving past what remained a small collection of homes for years. Looking at the place now, Norman Kirk's premonition could not have been more spot on. In Rolliston for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young Tēnei.
Thanks, Conan. We appreciate it. We're going to end tonight with looking at what the latest is in this extraordinary election in the UK. Remember, the Tories didn't have to go to the polls until 2020. Theresa May went early, 3 years early. She said she was after a mandate for Brexit. In fact, they were trying to put their foot on Labour's throat because Labour was in such disarray. They've had 330 seats. An overall majority in the UK Parliament is 326. They have lost 12 of their seats. And at the moment, their tally is 314. So they cannot form an overall majority government. They need coalition partners. Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, maligned, vilified from within his own party leadership. Campaigns against him is up 31 at 261. The English newspapers, the headlines, Theresa dismay, Core blimey, storm in Corbyn, Corbyn stuns the Tories, and May's poll nightmare. That's the Times playing it straight. We're getting it pretty right. None of them, however, match the New York Daily News. Donald Trump will be waking up today to find a large photo of himself across the front of the New York Daily News with the word liar written right across it. Quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. What an amazing day. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful weekend. On behalf of our excellent team, a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Britain's snap general election has produced a hung parliament, with Prime Minister Theresa May facing calls to resign. The government denies the UN has asked it to investigate New Zealand's involvement in a 2010 raid on Afghan villages. Today's government apology for the Parihaka invasion includes recognition of atrocities committed against the town's women for the first time. And the Ministry for Primary Industries has revealed it went against advice 2 years ago to remove oysters from Marlborough farms because they had the deadly parasite Bunameia austriae. Our next news and weather is at 7.
The National Party came to power in 2008, promising a brighter future.
One of the great things about election campaigns is we get to have a debate about what sort of future we want for our country.
As it eyes a fourth term in government, has National delivered?